The dust kicked up beneath her bare feet, each desperate step leaving red marks on the soles that she couldn't feel through the adrenaline. Eleanor Zimmerman's wedding dress snagged on a tumbleweed as she fled from the small white church that sat on the edge of Wood River, Nebraska. The year was 1878, and she was making the biggest decision of her 22 years of life. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of her father and the angry bellows of Bernard Thompson. The man she was supposed to marry, a man 30 years her senior with a temper that had already left bruises on her wrists during their brief engagement. Eleanor hadn't planned to run. The decision came when Bernard squeezed her arm too tightly just before they were to walk down the aisle, whispering promises of what would happen if she embarrassed him. The summer heat beat down mercilessly as she ran, her elaborate dress, which her mother had spent months sewing, now covered in dust and torn at the hem. Her veil was long gone, lost somewhere between the church doors and the wide open plains that stretched before her. Her golden brown hair tumbled down her back in waves, freed from the pins that had held it in place for the ceremony. She didn't know where she was running to. She only knew she couldn't go back. Bernard's cattle business made him the richest man in Wood River, and her father's farm was failing. The marriage had been arranged to save her family from financial ruin, but Eleanor couldn't sacrifice herself, not to a man like Bernard. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart stumble. They had come after her sooner than she'd expected. Eleanor veered off the main road, heading toward a copse of trees where she might find cover, but her dress, beautiful and voluminous, slowed her down. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she wouldn't make it. The rider approached quickly from the east, not from the direction of the church. Eleanor paused, hope fluttering in her chest. Perhaps this wasn't Bernard or her father after all. The man rode a magnificent chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His denim-clad legs gripped the horse confidently, and a revolver hung at his hip. As he drew closer, Eleanor could see his face strong-jawed and sun-weathered, with eyes the color of a summer sky. He pulled his horse to a stop beside her, taking in the sight of her torn dress, bare feet, and tear-stained face. Without a word, he extended his hand. "Get on," he said, his voice deep and commanding, yet somehow gentle. Eleanor hesitated only for a moment before reaching for his hand. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder. "They're coming," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I know," he replied, pulling her up behind him with surprising ease. "Hold tight." As Eleanor wrapped her arms around the stranger's waist, he spurred his horse into motion. The stallion responded instantly, powerful muscles propelling them forward, away from the church and the life she was fleeing. "Name's Xavier Irwin," he said over his shoulder as they galloped across the open plain. "Folks call me Zav." "Eleanor Zimmerman," she replied, her voice shaking with fear and exhilaration. "Thank you for whatever this is." "Look to me like you needed rescuing, Miss Zimmerman," he said. "Can't say I've ever stolen a bride before, though." Despite everything, Eleanor found herself laughing, a wild, breathless sound that was carried away by the wind. "You didn't steal me, Mr. Irwin. I stole myself." Xavier guided his horse across a shallow stream, the water splashing up and soaking the hem of Eleanor's already ruined dress. They needed to lose any trackers, and the water would help confuse their trail. "You want to tell me what you're running from?" Xavier asked after they'd put several miles between themselves and the church. He slowed the horse to a trot, aware that pushing the animal too hard in the summer heat would be dangerous. Eleanor took a deep breath, her arms still locked around Xavier's waist. She hadn't been this close to a man other than her father or Bernard, and she was suddenly aware of the impropriety of their position. But propriety seemed a small concern compared to what she'd just escaped. Bernard Thompson, she said, her voice stronger now. I was to be his bride today. My father arranged it. Bernard is. He's not a good man, though everyone thinks he is. Xavier nodded, understanding in his silence. The cattle baron, I know of him, reputation for being hard in business. And harder on women, Eleanor added bitterly. I saw what he did to his housekeeper when she broke a dish. And then when he started treating me the same way. Her voice cracked. I couldn't do it, not for all the security in the world. Xavier guided his horse toward a dense stand of cottonwoods that offered shade and concealment. We'll rest here a while, give Thunder a break, he said, referring to his horse. Then we need to figure out what to do with you. He helped Eleanor dismount, his hands strong and sure on her waist. Her bare feet touched the cool grass, and she winced at the stinging pain she'd been ignoring. Your feet, Xavier observed, concern etching lines around his eyes. He looked to be in his late 20s, with a few days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. Let me see. He led her to a fallen log and knelt before her, gently taking one of her feet in his hands. Eleanor felt her face flush at the intimate gesture. I'll be fine, she stammered. They're cut up pretty bad, Xavier said, ignoring her protest. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen and a clean bandana. Carefully, he washed the dust and blood from her feet, his touch clinical but kind. Why are you helping me? Eleanor asked, watching him work. You don't know me. Xavier looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. My ma ran from a bad marriage when I was just a boy, he said simply. No one helped her. She didn't make it far enough. He returned to his task, wrapping the bandana around her right foot. Besides, I never could abide a bully, and from what I've heard, Thompson fits that description. He tore a strip from his spare shirt for her other foot, securing it gently. These won't hold long, but they're better than nothing. Thank you, Eleanor said, meaning it with all her heart. Where will we go? Bernard has connections throughout the county. My father, too. Xavier stood, brushing dirt from his knees. I was headed to my brother's ranch near Valentine. It's a few days' ride north of here. You'd be safe there while you figure out your next move. Valentine. Eleanor had heard of the town but had never ventured that far north. What about your family? Won't they be in trouble for harboring me? Xavier smiled, a crooked grin that transformed his serious face. My brother Daniel doesn't scare easy, and his wife Sarah has been taking in strays since they got married. One more won't make a difference. He paused. Unless you have somewhere else in mind, Eleanor shook her head. She had an aunt in Kansas City, but getting there would require money and connections she didn't have. No, I didn't think beyond getting away. That's settled then, Xavier said, offering her his canteen. Drink. We'll rest a bit more, then keep moving. Thompson's not the type to give up easy, especially with his pride wounded. As Eleanor sipped the cool water, she studied her rescuer more carefully. Xavier Irwin wasn't conventionally handsome like some of the boys in Wood River. But there was something compelling about his face, a quiet strength that put her at ease despite their precarious situation. His clothes were worn but clean, and the way he handled his horse spoke of years of experience on the frontier. What brings you to Wood River? She asked. Are you passing through? Xavier was checking Thunder's shoes, making sure the grueling pace hadn't loosened any. Delivering a message to the telegraph office from Fort Robinson. Army business. He straightened up. I'm a scout for them, mostly tracking and guiding expeditions. I know this territory better than most. A scout, Eleanor repeated. It explained his confident navigation and the air of self-reliance he carried. So you're not. I mean, you don't have a wife, Xavier supplied, amusement lighting his eyes. No, Miss Zimmerman, hard to court properly when you're in the saddle more often than not. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm again. I didn't mean to pry. No offense taken. He secured the saddlebag and adjusted the cinch. We should get moving. There's a small homestead about 10 miles north where we can stop for the night. Owner owes me a favor. He helped Eleanor mount first, then swung up behind her, reversing their earlier position. She was acutely aware of his arms on either side of her as he took the reins, his chest solid against her back. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," she lied, knowing that comfort had little to do with their physical arrangement and everything to do with the intimacy of it. After a moment, she relaxed into his support, too exhausted to maintain her rigid posture. They rode at a steady pace, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the shelter of the rolling hills whenever possible. Xavier pointed out landmarks as they traveled a peculiar rock formation, a bend in the North Platte River, a distant herd of pronghorn antelope that scattered at their approach. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Eleanor's thoughts returned to Wood River and what she'd left behind. Her mother would be distraught, her father furious. The scandal would be the talk of the town for months. She'd never be able to return, at least not while Bernard Thompson lived and breathed. Having second thoughts, Xavier asked quietly, sensing her tension. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Not about leaving, just wondering what happens next. I've never been on my own." "One step at a time," Xavier advised. "First, we get you somewhere safe. The rest will follow." The homestead Xavier had mentioned came into view as dusk settled over the prairie, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, nestled in a protected draw. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a dog's bark announced their approach. A wiry man with a gray-streaked beard emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, squinting at the newcomers. His expression shifted from wariness to recognition as Xavier called out a greeting. "Irwin, that you?" The man lowered his rifle. "Wasn't expecting company." "Evening, Joe," Xavier replied. "Hope we're not imposing. Need a place to rest for the night." Joe's eyes moved to Eleanor, taking in her tattered wedding dress with undisguised curiosity. "Seems you've had an interesting day." Xavier dismounted and helped Eleanor down. Her makeshift bandages had come loose during the ride, and her feet throbbed painfully. "This is Miss Zimmerman," Xavier said. "She's in need of assistance." Joe nodded, seeming to understand more than was said. "Come on in, then." "Martha just put supper on." He turned to Eleanor with a gentle smile. "My wife might have some clothes that would fit you better than that fancy dress, miss." Inside the simple cabin, Martha Simmons proved to be a kind, motherly woman who took one look at Eleanor and immediately set about making her comfortable. She shooed the men outside while she helped Eleanor out of her ruined wedding dress and into a calico dress that was slightly too large but blessedly simple and practical. "Don't you worry about explanations," Martha said as she combed the tangles from Eleanor's hair. "Joe and I mind our own business. Been out here 20 years and we've learned that everybody's got their reasons for what they do." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes at the woman's kindness. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Nonsense," Martha replied briskly. "Xavier's a good man. If he's helping you, you must be worth helping." She inspected Eleanor's feet, clucking her tongue at the cuts and bruises. "Let's get these properly cleaned and bandaged, and then you'll have some supper. You look half-starved, poor thing." By the time the men returned, Eleanor was seated at the rough-hewn table, her feet bandaged and a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Martha served a simple but hearty meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, and Eleanor realized she was ravenous, having eaten nothing since a nervous breakfast that morning. Joe and Xavier discussed routes north, keeping their voices low, while Martha kept Eleanor's bowl filled and offered quiet reassurance. After the meal, Joe brought out a bottle of whiskey, pouring small measures for himself and Xavier. Eleanor declined but accepted a cup of strong, sweet tea. "Thompson's got men all over this county," Joe said, his voice carrying across the small room. "If he's looking for you, miss, won't take long before they come calling here." Eleanor's hand trembled around her cup. "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door." Joe waved off her concern. "Wouldn't be the first time, but Xavier's right, you need to get further north. Thompson's influence thins out past Valentine. We'll leave before dawn," Xavier decided. "Follow the Niobrara rather than the main trail." Martha disappeared into the cabin's single bedroom, returning with a bundle of clothing and a pair of worn but serviceable boots. "These were our daughters," she explained to Eleanor. "She's married and living in Omaha now. The boots might be a bit large, but with thick socks, they'll do better than bare feet." Eleanor accepted the gifts with overwhelming gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be careful," Martha replied, patting her hand. "And that someday, when you're settled and safe, you'll do the same for someone else in need." Joe made up pallets near the hearth for Eleanor and Xavier, insisting they take the warmer spot while he and Martha retreated to their bedroom. As Eleanor lay beneath a patchwork quilt, she could hear Xavier's steady breathing nearby and the occasional pop from the dying fire. "Xavier," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. Came his drowsy response. "Why did you stop when you saw me running? You could have just ridden past." There was a long pause, and Eleanor thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he answered, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "You looked like you knew exactly what you were doing, even running barefoot in a wedding dress. That kind of certainty. It's rare. Seemed wrong to leave you to face the consequences alone." Eleanor digested his words, finding comfort in them. "Well, thank you. Again. Get some sleep, Eleanor," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be another long day." True to his word, Xavier woke her while the stars were still bright in the sky. Martha had packed them provisions: jerky, biscuits, dried apples, and a small jar of honey. She pressed a folded handkerchief into Eleanor's hand before they left. "A little something to start your new life," she whispered. Later, when they stopped to water the horse, Eleanor unfolded the handkerchief to find $5 silver, a small fortune to a frontier family like the Simmonses. Xavier wasn't surprised. "Told you they were good people." They rode hard that day, Xavier pushing Thunder as much as he dared. He was more reserved than the previous day, scanning the horizon frequently, his hand often drifting to the revolver at his hip. By midday, Eleanor understood why a dust cloud in the distance marked riders moving parallel to their route, too far to identify but following the same general direction. "Thompson's men?" she asked, fear constricting her throat. "Maybe," Xavier conceded. "Or just travelers. Either way, we're keeping to cover as much as possible." They veered east, away from their planned route, spending uncomfortable hours navigating through a series of steep ravines that offered concealment but slowed their progress. Thunder was sure-footed, but Xavier dismounted at the trickier passages, leading the horse with Eleanor still mounted. By late afternoon, there was no sign of the other riders, but Xavier remained vigilant. They made camp in a small canyon, risking only the smallest of fires to heat coffee and warm their tired bodies. "Tell me about your family," Eleanor said as they shared the last of Martha's biscuits. "Your brother in Valentine, what's he like?" Xavier's expression softened at the mention of his brother. "Daniel's 4 years older than me, steadier. He was always the one with the plan, saved every penny from when we worked cattle drives to buy his land, built it up from nothing." Pride colored his voice. His wife Sarah's from back east originally, came out to teach school and caught Daniel's eye right away. They've got 2 boys now, Michael and Joseph. "And your parents?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted it when Xavier's face clouded. "Pa died in the war." Confederate sighed. Ma raised us alone until I was 12, then she. He paused. Well, like I said, she married badly the second time, didn't survive it. Eleanor reached out impulsively, touching his hand. I'm sorry. Xavier nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. After a moment, he turned the conversation. What about you? Besides the father who tried to marry you off to Thompson, any family that might help, my mother, Eleanor said softly. She'll be worried sick, but she'd never go against my father's wishes. I have an aunt in Kansas City, my mother's sister. We write occasionally. She might take me in if I could reach her. One step at a time, Xavier reminded her. First Valentine, then we can see about getting word to your aunt. That night, Eleanor slept fitfully, dreaming of Bernard's angry face and her father's disappointment. She woke before dawn to find Xavier already up, saddling Thunder and scanning the surrounding terrain. Sleep well, he asked, his tone suggesting he knew the answer. Well enough, she lied, accepting the jerky he offered for breakfast. They rode in comfortable silence as the sun rose, painting the prairie in gold and amber hues. Eleanor marveled at the vastness of it all, how different the landscape looked from this perspective compared to the narrow view she'd had growing up in Wood River. It's beautiful, she murmured, more to herself than to Xavier. Most people just see emptiness, he replied. But it's full of life if you know where to look. As if to prove his point, he pointed out a family of foxes denning near a cluster of rocks, and later, a golden eagle soaring high above. Eleanor began to see the land through his eyes not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a living entity with its own rhythms and secrets. By noon, they reached the Niobrara River, its waters flowing cool and clear between tree-lined banks. Xavier allowed Thunder a long drink before filling their canteens. We'll follow the river northwest, he explained, studying the sky. Make better time on the flatland, but we're more exposed. Eleanor nodded, trusting his judgment. The boots Martha had given her were indeed too large, but with strips of cloth padding the toes, they were far better than bare feet. The practical dress and shawl had replaced her wedding finery, and with her hair braided simply down her back, she looked like any frontier woman except for the lingering softness of her hands that betrayed her relatively sheltered upbringing. They had just remounted when Xavier suddenly stiffened, his hand going to his revolver. "Riders," he said tersely, nodding toward the west. Eleanor followed his gaze, her heart hammering as she made out 4 horsemen approaching at a gallop, their path angled to intercept Xavier and Eleanor before they could reach the cover of a distant tree line. "Thompson's men," she whispered. "Likely," Xavier replied grimly. "Hold tight." He spurred Thunder into motion, the horse responding gamely despite the miles already covered. They raced parallel to the river, but it was clear the pursuers had fresher mounts. The distance between them closed steadily. "They're gaining," Eleanor said, fear making her voice tight. Xavier made a swift decision, veering toward a shallow bend in the river. Thunder splashed across, water spraying as his powerful legs drove through the current. On the other side, Xavier didn't slow, pushing directly into a dense stand of cottonwoods and brush. Low-hanging branches whipped past as they navigated the thicket. Eleanor ducked, pressing close against Xavier's back. Behind them, they could hear shouts as their pursuers reached the river crossing. "Down," Xavier ordered suddenly, pulling Thunder to a halt in a small clearing. He helped Eleanor dismount quickly, then led the horse behind a fallen log, motioning for her to follow. "Stay low." Eleanor crouched beside him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give away their position. Xavier drew his revolver, checking that all chambers were loaded. "If this goes badly," he whispered, "head northeast through the trees. Keep the river on your left. About 2 miles up, there's a trapper's cabin. Man named Silas lives there. Tell him Xavier sent you, he'll help." "Don't," Eleanor pleaded, gripping his arm. "Don't talk like that." The sound of horses splashing across the river silenced them both. Xavier's free hand covered Eleanor's, squeezing gently in reassurance. 4 riders entered the woods, moving more cautiously now. Through the underbrush, Eleanor could make out dust-covered men with grim expressions. One she recognized as Bernard's foreman, Hank Miller, a cruel man who took too much pleasure in enforcing his employer's will. "Spread out," Miller ordered. "They can't have gone far. The girl's worth $50 to the man who finds her, the man with her." He spat on the ground. Mr. Thompson didn't specify alive or dead for him. The riders separated, moving in different directions through the trees. Xavier remained motionless, his breathing steady despite the tension evident in every line of his body. Eleanor forced herself to stay still, though every instinct screamed for flight. One rider passed within 20 feet of their hiding place, his horse snorting nervously. The man peered around suspiciously, but continued past without spotting them. Minutes stretched like hours as they listened to the sounds of the search cracking branches, the occasional call between riders. Just as Eleanor began to hope they might escape detection, Thunder shifted his weight, stepping on a dry branch that snapped with a sharp crack. The nearest rider wheeled his horse around. "Over here," he shouted. "I heard something." Xavier moved with lightning speed, shoving Eleanor toward the densest part of the underbrush. "Run," he hissed. "Remember northeast 2 miles, Silas." Before she could protest, he was on his feet, firing a warning shot into the air that sent the approaching horse rearing in panic, its rider struggling to maintain control. Xavier used the distraction to swing onto Thunder's back, spurring the horse in the opposite direction from where he'd sent Eleanor. "There he is." Another rider spotted him. "After him." Eleanor watched in horror as 3 of the men galloped after Xavier, while the 4th Miller dismounted and began searching the area on foot, apparently suspecting Xavier's diversion. Come out, little bride," Miller called, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Mr. Thompson just wants what's his. No harm will come to you if you surrender now." Eleanor pressed herself flat against the forest floor, hardly daring to breathe. Miller moved methodically through the underbrush, his heavy boots crushing the vegetation only yards from where she hid. "Your father's beside himself with worry," Miller continued, closer now. "And poor Mr. Thompson, you've wounded him deeply, running off like that, but he's a forgiving man, for you at least." His voice hardened. "That saddle tramp who took you, though, Mr. Thompson has special plans for him." Anger flashed through Eleanor at the threat to Xavier. This man, this entire situation represented everything she'd been running from. She wouldn't be powerless again, wouldn't let fear rule her actions. Carefully, she reached for a heavy fallen branch near her hiding place. Miller's boots appeared in her limited line of sight, circling closer. Eleanor waited until he turned slightly away before rising in one fluid motion, swinging the branch with all her strength. It connected with the back of Miller's head with a sickening thud. He stumbled forward, dropping to one knee, his hand fumbling for the pistol at his hip. Eleanor didn't give him the chance, bringing the branch down again. This time, Miller collapsed fully, unconscious but still breathing. Shaking, Eleanor retrieved Miller's pistol, tucking it into the waistband of her dress. She could still hear distant shouts and occasional gunfire, Xavier leading the other men away from her. Torn between following his instructions and trying to help him, Eleanor hesitated. The decision was made for her when more gunshots echoed through the trees, followed by the thunder of approaching hooves. Someone was coming back. Eleanor turned and ran northeast as Xavier had instructed, her borrowed boots sliding on the uneven forest floor. The river glimmered through the trees on her left, confirming her direction. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out, stopping only when she reached a small stream feeding into the main river. There she paused, listening intently for sounds of pursuit. Hearing nothing but the natural chorus of birds and insects, Eleanor waded into the stream, following it upstream to confuse her trail. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy as she pushed on, constantly checking her bearings against the river's flow. True to Xavier's word, after what felt like 2 miles, she spotted a small log cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping. Smoke curled from its chimney, and several animal pelts were stretched on frames nearby. Eleanor approached cautiously, Miller's pistol heavy in her hand. Before she reached the cabin door, it swung open, revealing a white, bearded man with a shotgun leveled at her chest. "That's far enough," he called, his roomy eyes narrowing. "State your business." "Are you Silas?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Xavier Irwin sent me. He's in trouble." The old man lowered his shotgun slightly. "Zav's in trouble, is he? And who might you be?" "Eleanor Zimmerman. Please, there are men after us. Xavier led them away, but I don't know if he's—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Silas studied her for a long moment before nodding once decisively. "Come inside, girl. Quickly now." The cabin's interior was cluttered but clean, the walls hung with traps, tools, and more animal pelts. A pot of something fragrant bubbled over the fire, and a scarred wooden table held an assortment of half-finished leatherwork. "Sit," Silas ordered, gesturing to a chair. "You look about done in." Eleanor sank gratefully into the seat, setting Miller's pistol on the table. "Thank you. I didn't know where else to go." "Zav's got good sense," Silas grunted, pouring her a tin cup of coffee. "Now tell me what kind of hornet's nest you two stirred up." Eleanor gave him the abbreviated version: her escape from the wedding, Xavier's timely appearance, and their flight north. Silas listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if pieces were falling into place. "Bernard Thompson," he said when she finished. "Man's got a reputation that reaches even up here. Not a good one, neither." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Xav knows these woods near as well as I do. If he can shake those riders, he'll head here." "And if he can't?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. Silas's weathered face softened slightly. "Then we wait till dark and I take you on to Valentine myself. Daniel Irwin would want to know what happened to his brother regardless." The thought of continuing without Xavier made Eleanor's chest ache in a way that surprised her. In just 2 days, this stranger had become vitally important to her, not just as a rescuer or protector, but as someone whose steady presence she'd come to rely on. "I'm going back to look for him," she declared, rising from the chair. Silas blocked her path. "You'll do no such foolishness. Best help you can give Xav is staying put. Man's got enough to worry about without you wandering back into danger." Reluctantly, Eleanor acknowledged the logic in this. She sank back into the chair, accepting another cup of coffee and allowing Silas to tend to her blistered feet with a salve that smelled strongly of pine. As dusk fell, Silas lit a lantern and placed it in the cabin's single window. "Signal," he explained. "Xav will recognize it if he's out there." They ate a simple supper of rabbit stew. Though Eleanor managed only a few bites, her stomach knotted with worry. Silas told stories of his years as a trapper, his friendship with Xavier's father during the early settlement days, and his occasional work as a guide for the army. Eleanor listened with half an ear, her attention focused on the sounds outside the cabin. The crackle and snap of a twig brought both of them to alert attention. Silas reached for his shotgun, motioning for Eleanor to move away from the window. "Silas." A familiar voice called softly from the darkness. It's Xavier. Eleanor's heart leaped. She rushed to the door before Silas could stop her, throwing it open to see Xavier dismounting from Thunder. His shirt was torn and bloodied at the shoulder, and a graze along his cheek had left a trail of dried blood, but he was upright and alert. "You made it," she breathed, relief making her dizzy. "Told you I would," he replied with a tired smile. "You all right?" "Better than you from the looks of it," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Silas surveyed Xavier's injuries with a critical eye. "Sit before you fall down, boy. Eleanor, fetch my medicine box from that shelf." Xavier eased himself into a chair, wincing as Silas helped him remove his shirt. A deep furrow across his upper arm revealed where a bullet had grazed him, and bruises were already forming along his ribs. "Had worse from falling off a horse," Xavier insisted, as Silas cleaned the wound with whiskey. He hissed through clenched teeth but didn't pull away. "Lost 2 of Thompson's men in the ravines. The other circled back, probably to find Miller." "He won't," Eleanor said, earning surprised looks from both men. I hit him with a branch, took his pistol." She nodded toward the gun still lying on the table. Xavier's expression shifted from surprise to admiration. "Remind me not to underestimate you, Miss Zimmerman." "Eleanor," she corrected. "After all this, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, warmth mingled with a deeper emotion she couldn't quite name. "Eleanor," he agreed. Silas finished bandaging Xavier's arm, muttering about reckless young fools the entire time. "You'll live," he pronounced finally, "but you need rest, both of you." The old trapper insisted Xavier take the narrow bed in the corner, while he rigged a hammock for himself near the fire. For Eleanor, he constructed a surprisingly comfortable pallet, using spare blankets and a bearskin rug. Despite her exhaustion, Eleanor found sleep elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Xavier riding away, drawing danger from her. She heard the gunshots echoing through the trees and imagined far worse outcomes than his eventual return. "Can't sleep?" Xavier's whispered question startled her. Eleanor turned to find him watching her from the bed, his eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "Too much thinking," she admitted. "About what happens next." "About what could have happened today," she corrected. "You could have been killed because of me." Xavier shifted, propping himself up on his good arm. "I make my own choices, Eleanor, always have." His voice was soft but firm. "Besides, seemed like you handled yourself pretty well with Miller." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "I surprised myself. I've never hit anyone before." "World's full of surprises," Xavier said, settling back down. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we reach Valentine and you can start figuring out that next step." The thought should have been comforting, reaching safety, having time to plan her future. Instead, Eleanor felt an unexpected pang at the idea that their journey was nearing its end. She wondered what role, if any, Xavier Irwin would play in whatever came next. Morning brought clear skies and a decision from Silas that they would all travel to Valentine together. "Safety in numbers," he declared, brooking no argument as he packed provisions and ammunition. They set out as the sun crested the horizon, Eleanor riding Thunder while Xavier and Silas walked alongside. Xavier insisted his injuries weren't severe enough to warrant special treatment, but Eleanor could see the stiffness in his movements, the careful way he favored his wounded arm. Their pace was necessarily slower than before, but Silas knew shortcuts that kept them well away from the main trails. By midday, they had covered significant ground, stopping briefly near a spring to rest and water the horse. "Another day's travel," Silas estimated, refilling canteens. "We'll camp tonight and reach Daniel's place by tomorrow afternoon." "Will Thompson's men follow us this far north?" Eleanor asked, scanning the horizon nervously. "Doubtful," Silas replied. Valentine's outside his usual territory, and the law there doesn't bend to wealthy cattle barons like it might in some places. He glanced at Xavier. Sheriff Garland still in office, Xavier nodded. And still as stubborn as ever. He wouldn't hand Eleanor over without proper cause, and running from a wedding isn't a crime. Once we reach Valentine, you should send word to your aunt in Kansas City, Silas advised Eleanor. Might be your best option for a fresh start. The suggestion was sensible, but Eleanor found herself reluctant to commit to it. Kansas City seemed so far away, so unknown, and it would mean leaving behind the only person who had shown her true kindness without expectation, Xavier. They continued north throughout the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they entered the Sandhills region. Rolling dunes covered with prairie grass stretched as far as the eye could see, creating an almost otherworldly beauty. "Never seen anything like this," Eleanor remarked, taking in the unique terrain. "Cattle country," Xavier explained. "Good grazing land if you know how to manage it. That's what drew my brother here." As promised, they made camp as the sun began to set, finding shelter in a natural depression that offered protection from the wind. Silas proved remarkably adept at creating comfort in the wilderness, constructing a small fire pit that provided warmth with minimal smoke, and setting up a makeshift windbreak using a tarp from his pack. Eleanor insisted on taking her turn at useful tasks, preparing a simple meal from their provisions while Xavier tended to thunder, and Silas set snares in hopes of fresh meat for breakfast. As they ate, Xavier spoke more about his brother's ranch, the small herd of cattle he was slowly building, the new barn they'd raised last summer, the plans for expanding once the boys were old enough to help more. His obvious pride and affection for his family painted a picture of the life awaiting them in Valentine, a life of hard work, but also of connection and purpose. "And what about you?" Eleanor asked. "Will you stay at the ranch, or return to your scouting work?" Xavier considered the question, poking at the fire with a stick. "Haven't decided. Army contract ends in a few months. Daniel's always said there's a place for me at the ranch." "But," Eleanor prompted, sensing his hesitation. "But I've never been good at staying put," he admitted. "Always had itchy feet, as my ma used to say. There's too much world to see." Eleanor nodded, understanding better than she might have before her own impulsive flight. "Freedom to choose your path is precious," she said softly. "I'm only beginning to understand how precious." Their eyes met across the fire, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, recognition of a kindred spirit, perhaps, or acknowledgement of possibilities neither was ready to voice. Silas broke the moment, returning from checking his snares with a satisfied grunt. "Caught a rabbit already. Breakfast is secured." He settled himself by the fire, pulling out a pipe and tobacco pouch. "You two should get some sleep. I'll take first watch." Despite Silas's insistence that they were likely beyond Thompson's reach, none of them were willing to risk complete vulnerability. They arranged a rotation of watches, with Xavier taking the middle shift despite his injuries, and Eleanor the pre-dawn hours. When Xavier gently shook her awake for her turn, the night was at its darkest point, the stars brilliant overhead. She sat wrapped in her blanket, listening to the night sounds and watching the sleeping forms of her companions. In the peaceful stillness, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she'd been running from, one with purpose and connection, perhaps even love. Dawn broke with mist rising from the valleys between the sand hills, creating an ethereal landscape that took Eleanor's breath away. Silas's rabbit provided a hearty breakfast, and they broke camp efficiently, eager to reach their destination. As they traveled, Eleanor noticed Xavier growing more animated, pointing out landmarks he recognized as they drew closer to his brother's ranch. His obvious excitement at returning home was infectious, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to meeting the family she'd heard so much about. By mid-afternoon, they crested a gentle rise to see a modest ranch spread out before them, a sturdy cabin with a covered porch, a large barn, corrals, and outbuildings, all nestled in a protected valley with a small creek running nearby. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and smoke rose invitingly from the cabin's chimney. "There it is," Xavier said, unmistakable fondness in his voice. "Home." Their approach was noticed quickly. Two young boys came running from the barn, shouting excitedly, followed by a tall, broad-shouldered man who bore a striking resemblance to Xavier. A woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on an apron, her face lighting up at the sight of the travelers. "Uncle Zav! Uncle Zav!" The boys reached them first, dancing around Thunder until Xavier dismounted to embrace them properly. "Michael, Joseph, you've both grown a foot since I saw you last," he exclaimed, ruffling their hair affectionately. Daniel Irwin reached them next, clasping his brother's hand before pulling him into a firm embrace. "Wasn't expecting you for at least another week," he said, then stepped back, noticing Xavier's bandaged arm and the strangers accompanying him. "Trouble?" "Something like that," Xavier acknowledged with a wry smile. He turned to include Eleanor and Silas. "Daniel, this is Miss Eleanor Zimmerman, and Silas, you remember him from when we were boys." "Hard to forget the man who taught me to trap my first beaver," Daniel said with a warm handshake for the old trapper. He turned to Eleanor, his expression curious but welcoming. "Miss Zimmerman, welcome to our home." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed clothes and travel-worn appearance. Sarah Irwin arrived then, embracing Xavier carefully before turning her attention to their guests. She was a pretty woman with intelligent eyes and a confident manner that immediately put Eleanor at ease. "Come inside, all of you," she insisted. "You look exhausted, and I've just pulled a batch of bread from the oven. Whatever stories need telling can wait until you've rested and eaten." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture, colorful quilts, and signs of family life everywhere: books, toys, a half-finished sewing project. Sarah bustled about, setting places at the large table while the boys peppered Xavier with questions about his journey. Over fresh bread, preserved fruit, and strong coffee, Xavier related their adventure with occasional additions from Eleanor and Silas. Daniel listened intently, his expression growing grave at the mention of Bernard Thompson. "Man's got a reputation that extends even up here," he said, echoing Silas's earlier assessment. "Heard he's been trying to expand his holdings northward." "He won't follow us this far," Xavier assured Eleanor, noting her concerned expression. "Not worth the risk for him." "Besides," Sarah added firmly, "you're under our protection now. The Irwins take care of their own." She squeezed Eleanor's hand reassuringly, treating her already as part of the family circle. The simple kindness brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. After the chaos and fear of the past days, the warmth of this family home felt like a safe harbor in a storm. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to express fully what their acceptance meant to her. After the meal, Sarah showed Eleanor to a small but clean room off the main living area. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's private. The boys usually sleep up in the loft, and Daniel and I have our room. Zav can bunk in the barn like he usually does when he visits." "It's perfect," Eleanor assured her, deeply touched by their generosity. "I can't thank you enough for taking me in like this." Sarah's smile was understanding. "Every woman deserves the chance to make her own choices, Eleanor. I left my own comfortable life back east to come teach on the frontier, scandalized my entire family. Best decision I ever made." Her eyes softened as she glanced toward the main room where her husband's deep laugh mingled with Xavier's. "Sometimes the right path isn't the one laid out for you." That evening, after Silas had departed with promises to visit again soon, the family gathered around the fireplace. The boys, despite their initial excitement, soon nodded off against their father's side. Daniel carried them up to the loft, leaving Eleanor with Xavier and Sarah. "I should write to my aunt in Kansas City," Eleanor said, voicing the practical thought that had been nagging at her, "to see if she might take me in, at least until I can find employment." "There's no rush," Sarah assured her. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to sort things out." Xavier, who had been unusually quiet since dinner, finally spoke up. "Valentine's growing. They might need a school teacher soon. Sarah was saying just last month that the town council was discussing it." Sarah nodded eagerly. "That's true. I gave up teaching when Joseph was born, but with both boys in school now, I've been thinking of offering lessons again. The town's certainly large enough to support a proper school. The possibility of staying in Valentine, of building a new life here rather than fleeing to Kansas City, sparked something in Eleanor that felt dangerously like hope. "I don't have formal training," she admitted, "but I've always loved learning. My mother taught me Latin and French, and I read everything I could get my hands on." "That's more education than most around here," Sarah said encouragingly. "Think about it. No need to decide anything tonight." When Daniel returned, the conversation shifted to ranch matters, with Xavier offering updates on conditions further south and discussing plans for the upcoming cattle sale. Eleanor listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a world so different from her protected upbringing in Wood River. Later, as the evening wound down, Xavier offered to walk Eleanor to her room. In the short hallway, away from Daniel and Sarah's ears, he paused. "I wanted to make sure you're really all right," he said, his voice low. "It's been quite a journey." Eleanor looked up at him, struck anew by the quiet strength in his face, the genuine concern in his blue eyes. "I'm better than all right," she answered honestly. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, even if I'm not sure what comes next." Xavier nodded, seeming to understand perfectly. "Sometimes the not knowing is the best part," he said. "Means all paths are open." On impulse, Eleanor rose on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything." A flush crept up his neck, visible even in the dim hallway. "Sleep well, Eleanor," he murmured, before turning and heading toward the door and his barn accommodations. The days that followed established a rhythm that Eleanor found surprisingly comfortable. Sarah welcomed her help with household tasks, teaching Eleanor the skills of frontier living she'd never needed in town: how to churn butter, preserve vegetables, and manage the endless work of maintaining a ranch home. Daniel treated her with the same respectful consideration he showed his wife, neither questioning her presence nor making her feel like a burden. The boys, once their initial shyness wore off, included her in their games and proudly showed her their favorite spots around the ranch. And Xavier was a constant, steady presence, working alongside his brother during the days, joining the family for meals, and often finding moments to speak with Eleanor alone. They would walk along the creek in the evenings, or sit on the porch steps watching the sunset, sharing stories of their lives before their paths had crossed. Eleanor learned that Xavier had fought briefly in the latter part of the Civil War, too young to enlist properly, but determined to follow his father's example. He traveled extensively afterward, working cattle drives, prospecting in Colorado, and eventually finding his niche as a scout for the Army. In turn, she told him about her sheltered upbringing, her love of books, and her secret dreams of someday seeing the places she'd only read about: New York, San Francisco, perhaps even Europe. Dreams that had seemed impossible in Wood River, but now felt within reach of her newly discovered courage. A week after their arrival, Daniel returned from a supply run to Valentine with news that the town council was indeed seeking a teacher for the coming school year. Sarah immediately suggested Eleanor apply, and with their encouragement, she agreed to ride into town the following day to meet with the council chairman. That evening, Xavier found Eleanor sitting alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked, settling beside her on the step. A little, she admitted. I want this opportunity, but I'm afraid they'll think I'm not qualified. You're smarter than half the people in Valentine put together, Xavier said matter-of-factly, and you've got more determination than most. That counts for more out here than formal credentials. Eleanor smiled, warmed by his confidence in her. Will you come with me? To town, I mean. Plan to, Xavier replied. Need to check in at the telegraph office anyway, see if there are any messages from Fort Robinson. Something in his tone made Eleanor glance at him sharply. You're thinking of going back to your scouting work, Xavier shrugged, not meeting her eyes. Contract's not up for another 2 months, have responsibilities to finish. The thought of him leaving caused a hollow feeling in Eleanor's chest that surprised her with its intensity. In just over a week, Xavier Irwin had become essential to her sense of security and happiness. The idea of continuing without him felt wrong somehow. I see, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. When would you leave? Not immediately, he assured her. Shoulder needs more healing, and I wouldn't leave until you're settled one way or another. Eleanor nodded, appreciating his concern but wishing for more. For what exactly, she wasn't sure. Their relationship existed in an undefined space between rescuer and rescued, between friendship and something deeper neither had acknowledged. Thank you, she said finally, for lack of better words. Xavier seemed to understand what remained unspoken. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the wooden step between them. They sat in companionable silence as night fully claimed the sky, each lost in thoughts of what might come next. Valentine proved to be a busy, growing town with a main street lined with businesses: a general store, hotel, livery stable, several saloons, and a small but respectable-looking church. Eleanor observed it all with interest as Xavier guided Thunder down the dusty street toward the town hall. The meeting with the council chairman, a dignified older man named Judge Harrison, went better than Eleanor had dared hope. Her evident education and enthusiasm outweighed her lack of formal teaching credentials, and the need for a teacher was pressing enough that the judge offered her the position on the spot, contingent only on her ability to start when the school term began in 3 weeks. We can provide modest accommodation, Judge Harrison explained. There's a small house behind the schoolhouse that's traditionally been the teacher's residence. Nothing fancy, but it's sound and private. Eleanor accepted gratefully, her mind already racing with plans and possibilities. A job, a home of her own, a purpose, all things that had seemed unattainable when she fled barefoot from the church in Wood River. Afterward, while Xavier checked for telegrams, Eleanor explored the general store, marveling at the variety of goods available. With some of the silver dollars Martha Simmons had given her, she purchased a journal and pencil, eager to record her thoughts and plans. She was examining a display of fabric when Xavier found her, his expression unreadable. Got a telegram, he said simply. Army needs me back at Fort Robinson by the end of the week. Indian trouble brewing in the northwest corner of the territory. Eleanor's heart sank, though she tried not to let it show. So soon, "What about your shoulder? Healed enough," he said with a shrug that belied his words. "It's my job, Eleanor, what I signed on for." She nodded, understanding but hating it nonetheless. "When will you leave?" "Day after tomorrow," Xavier replied. "Gives me time to help Daniel finish the North Corral repairs first." They completed their errands in town mostly in silence, each processing the implications of this development. On the ride back to the ranch, Eleanor finally voiced the question that had been troubling her. "Will you come back? To Valentine, I mean, after your contract ends?" Xavier was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Been thinking about that. Daniel could use the help with the ranch, especially with the boys still young. Might be time to put down roots." Hope fluttered in Eleanor's chest. "I'd like that," she said softly. "If you came back, I mean." Xavier glanced at her, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Would you now?" The teasing note in his voice made Eleanor blush, but she held his gaze steadily. "Yes, I would." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first desperate ride away from Wood River. Xavier reined thunder to a halt, turning in the saddle to face Eleanor more fully. "Eleanor," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I know it's been a short time and you've been through a lot. I don't want to rush you or assume anything, but these past days—" He paused, searching for words. "I've never met anyone quite like you." Eleanor's heart raced at the sincerity in his voice. "Nor I you," she replied honestly. "You changed my life, Xavier, not just by helping me escape, but by showing me a different way to be brave and true to oneself." Xavier's hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "I'll come back," he promised, "after my contract ends. And if you're still here, still wanting to see where this might lead—" "I'll be here," Eleanor assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Teaching the children of Valentine and waiting for a certain scout to find his way home." The intensity in Xavier's blue eyes made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her a gentle, questioning kiss that held promise rather than demand. Eleanor responded with equal tenderness, her free hand coming to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When they parted, Xavier's smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. "Something to come back for," he said softly. The next day and a half passed too quickly. Eleanor helped Sarah prepare special meals for Xavier's last days at the ranch, while trying to absorb as much practical knowledge as possible before starting her teaching position. Xavier divided his time between ranch work with Daniel and moments stolen with Eleanor walks, conversations, and increasingly affectionate exchanges that confirmed their growing attachment. The evening before his departure, Daniel and Sarah tactfully gave them privacy, taking the boys to visit neighbors. Xavier and Eleanor sat before the fireplace, talking of future possibilities with a mixture of hope and caution. 2 months isn't so long, Xavier assured her, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "And the school term will keep you busy." "I know," Eleanor sighed. "It's just that I've only just found you and now you're leaving." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple. "Found each other," he corrected gently. "And we'll find each other again. Some things are meant to be, Eleanor." She turned to face him, searching his eyes in the firelight. "Do you believe that some things are meant to be?" "Wasn't sure I did," he admitted, "until I saw a barefoot bride running from a church and knew I had to stop." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for that moment." "As am I," Eleanor whispered, before leaning in to kiss him with a boldness that surprised them both. They parted reluctantly when they heard Daniel's wagon approaching, both aware of the propriety expected despite their feelings. The evening concluded with family conversation and plans for Xavier's return, the atmosphere bittersweet but hopeful. Morning came too soon. Eleanor rose early to help Sarah prepare a hearty breakfast, wanting these last hours to be perfect. Xavier appeared with his pack and gear, dressed for travel in his buckskin jacket and wide-brimmed hat, looking every inch the frontier scout she'd first encountered. Breakfast was a lively affair despite the impending farewell, with the boys peppering Xavier with questions and extracting promises of stories upon his return. Daniel gave his brother practical advice about trail conditions, while Sarah ensured his provisions were ample. Finally, it was time. Daniel and the boys headed to the barn to saddle Thunder, leaving Xavier, Eleanor, and Sarah in the cabin for their goodbyes. Sarah embraced her brother-in-law warmly, then tactfully excused herself to help Daniel with something, giving the couple a moment alone. Xavier drew Eleanor into his arms, holding her close as if committing the feeling to memory. 2 months, he murmured against her hair. Seems like forever now, but it'll pass. Be careful, Eleanor pleaded, her hands gripping the rough fabric of his jacket. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, he said solemnly. He pulled back slightly, reaching into his pocket. I have something for you, to remember our first meeting. He pressed a small object into her palm, a silver horseshoe charm on a simple chain. It's not fancy, but it's for luck. And to remind you that sometimes the right horse comes along at exactly the right moment. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she closed her fingers around the gift. It's perfect. Help me put it on. Xavier fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin in a touch that sent warmth through her entire body. The charm rested just below her collarbone, a tangible reminder of their unusual beginning. All right, he promised, bending to kiss her one last time, a kiss filled with longing and promise that left them both breathless. I'll be here, she assured him, teaching and waiting. Outside, the family gathered to see Xavier off. Final embraces were exchanged, last-minute advice given. Xavier mounted Thunder, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. His eyes found Eleanor's, communicating what words couldn't fully express. 2 months, he reminded her, before touching his hat brim in a gesture that was both farewell and promise. Eleanor watched him ride away, the silver charm warm against her skin, her heart full of an emotion she now recognized without reservation: love. Not the desperate infatuation of romantic novels, but something stronger and more enduring, built on respect and genuine connection. As Xavier disappeared over the rise, Sarah's arm came around Eleanor's shoulders. He'll be back, she said with absolute certainty. I've never seen my brother-in-law look at anyone the way he looks at you. Eleanor smiled, touching the horseshoe charm. I know, she replied, surprising herself with her confidence. Some things are meant to be. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Eleanor prepared for her teaching position. Sarah proved an invaluable mentor, sharing lesson plans and practical advice from her own teaching days. Daniel took Eleanor into Valentine several times to help set up the schoolhouse and become acquainted with her new home, the small but cozy teacher's cottage behind the school. Letters from Xavier arrived sporadically, carried by army couriers to the Valentine telegraph office. His messages were brief but reassuring descriptions of the landscape, anecdotes about fellow scouts, and always a few lines that were meant for her eyes alone, expressions of his growing feelings and anticipation of their reunion. Eleanor replied faithfully, sending her letters to Fort Robinson with travelers heading that direction. She wrote of her preparations for teaching, the families she was meeting in Valentine, and her growing confidence in her decision to build a life here. Between the lines of practical information, she conveyed her deepening attachment to him, her certainty that their brief but intense connection was evolving into something lasting. The school term began with 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, a challenging mix of abilities and backgrounds that demanded all of Eleanor's creativity and patience. Yet she thrived on the challenge, discovering a natural talent for teaching she hadn't known she possessed. Days fell into a pleasant routine. Mornings and afternoons were devoted to her students, evenings to preparing lessons and grading schoolwork. Weekends often found her at the Irwin Ranch, where she had become an honorary family member. Daniel and Sarah's support never wavered, and the boys treated her with the same affection they showed their beloved Uncle Xav. 6 weeks after Xavier's departure, Eleanor received news that both thrilled and unsettled her. A letter arrived from her aunt in Kansas City, responding to the carefully worded message Eleanor had sent explaining her situation. Her aunt expressed support for Eleanor's decision to leave an unwanted marriage and offered her home as refuge if needed. More surprisingly, she included a letter from Eleanor's mother. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it, prepared for condemnation or pleas to return. Instead, her mother's words brought tears to her eyes. "My dearest daughter, while I cannot openly defy your father, know that my heart rejoices in your courage to seek a better life than the one we arranged for you. Bernard Thompson has revealed his true nature since your departure, confirming your wisdom in fleeing. I pray for your safety and happiness, wherever you may be." With enduring love, Mother, the letter contained no request for Eleanor's whereabouts, no demand that she return, just unconditional love and understanding that Eleanor had never fully realized her mother possessed. It gave her a sense of closure, a final confirmation that she had made the right choice that day when she ran barefoot from the church. As the 8th week of Xavier's absence began, Eleanor found herself counting days, then hours. His last letter had confirmed his planned return date, adding that he had news to share that couldn't be committed to paper. The mystery of this statement added to her anticipation, filling her thoughts even as she taught arithmetic to her fidgeting students. The appointed day arrived, a crisp autumn morning with leaves beginning to turn gold and red on the trees surrounding Valentine. Eleanor struggled to focus on her lessons, her eyes constantly straying to the schoolhouse window that faced the main road into town. At midday, she released the children for their lunch break, watching them scatter to the schoolyard with their pails and bundles. Eleanor remained at her desk, attempting to grade spelling tests but making little progress. The sound of hoofbeats outside brought her to her feet, her heart racing. She reached the schoolhouse door just as Xavier dismounted, looking travel-worn but whole. Their eyes met across the short distance, and in that moment, all the weeks of separation seemed to vanish. "You're here," Eleanor breathed, hardly believing the sight of him despite her certainty he would return. "Told you I would be," Xavier replied, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. Propriety dictated restraint. They were in full view of her students, after all, but when Xavier reached her, propriety seemed a distant concern. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that expressed everything words couldn't. When he set her down, his hands framed her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I missed you," he said simply. "And I you," she replied, acutely aware of the curious stares and giggles from the schoolyard. "The children, let them look," Xavier said with a grin. "Might as well give them something to talk about." Nevertheless, he stepped back slightly, maintaining a more appropriate distance while keeping hold of her hand. "When do your classes end today?" 3 o'clock, Eleanor replied. "But I have papers to grade after." "The papers can wait," Xavier interrupted. "I have something important to discuss with you." The seriousness beneath his smile made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "What is it?" "The news you mentioned in your letter." "Later," he promised. "After school. I'll come to your cottage." Eleanor reluctantly agreed, knowing she wouldn't be able to concentrate on anything until she heard what Xavier had to say. He departed with a tip of his hat and a smile that carried her through the afternoon's lessons, despite the knowing looks from her older students. The final bell couldn't come soon enough. Eleanor dismissed her class, tidied the schoolroom with unusual haste, and practically ran to her cottage to freshen up before Xavier's arrival. She changed from her serviceable teaching dress to a prettier blue one that Sarah had helped her make, and loosened her hair from its severe bun, allowing it to fall in waves down her back the way Xavier had once mentioned he liked. A knock at her door announced his arrival. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing her dress before opening it to find Xavier standing on her small porch, similarly refreshed from his travels. He'd shaved and changed into clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing. "Come in," she invited, suddenly shy despite the letters they'd exchanged and the feelings they'd acknowledged. Xavier entered, looking around the small but comfortable space that Eleanor had made her own over the past weeks. Personal touches were evident everywhere: wildflowers in a jar on the table, a quilt from Sarah draped over the rocking chair, books stacked on every available surface. "It suits you," he observed. "A teacher's home." "It's become that," Eleanor agreed, gesturing for him to sit at her small table. "Would you like coffee? Or I have some apple cider Sarah sent." "Eleanor," Xavier interrupted gently, remaining standing. "I didn't come for refreshments," she stilled, noting the intensity in his expression. "Your news," Xavier nodded, taking a step closer. "I've made a decision." "Several, actually." He reached for her hands, holding them in his larger ones. "My contract with the Army is complete. I won't be renewing it." "You won't?" Eleanor's heart leaped with hope. "What will you do instead?" "Daniel needs a partner in the ranch," Xavier explained. "The operation's growing and he can't manage it alone. He's offered me a full partnership, equal share in everything, starting immediately." "You're staying in Valentine," Eleanor breathed, joy flooding through her. "For good." "For good," Xavier confirmed, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. "But that decision was easy compared to the other one I've been considering." Eleanor looked up at him questioningly, afraid to hope for what his words seemed to be leading toward. Xavier released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small, simple ring, a silver band set with a single modest pearl. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "The one thing of hers I've kept all these years. She told me once to give it only to a woman with courage and heart to match the pearl's luster." Eleanor's breath caught as Xavier dropped to one knee before her, still holding her left hand. "I know it's fast," he acknowledged. "We've known each other less than 3 months. But sometimes when you know, you know." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I knew the moment I saw you running barefoot from that church, Eleanor Zimmerman. I knew you were someone extraordinary, someone I wanted in my life for always." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as Xavier continued. "I love you. Your strength, your kindness, your determination. I want to build a life with you here in Valentine, on the ranch with Daniel and Sarah, teaching your students, raising a family of our own someday. If you'll have me." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, not needing to consider. Like Xavier, she had known with growing certainty over these weeks apart that what they shared was rare and precious. "Yes, Xavier, I'll marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. Xavier rose to his feet, drawing Eleanor into his arms and sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. They were married a month later in Valentine's small church, with Daniel standing as Xavier's best man and Sarah as Eleanor's matron of honor. Judge Harrison gave the bride away, and Eleanor's students sang a specially rehearsed hymn for the occasion. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of their new schoolteacher and the Irwin Ranch's newest partner. Eleanor wore a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored satin that Sarah and several other women had helped create, with the silver horseshoe charm Xavier's first gift to her nestled at her throat. Instead of a veil, she wore wildflowers in her hair, a symbol of the natural beauty of the life they were choosing together. As they exchanged vows, Eleanor couldn't help but reflect on the contrast between this joyful ceremony and the one she had fled months earlier. Here was a marriage built on love and respect rather than obligation, a choice made freely rather than forced by circumstance. Xavier's voice was steady as he promised to cherish and protect her all the days of their lives, his eyes never leaving hers. When he slipped a simple gold band alongside his mother's ring on her finger, his hands were gentle but sure, the hands that had helped her onto his horse that fateful day, that had tended her injured feet, that had held her with such care during their brief times together. Eleanor's own vows came from the heart, a promise to stand beside him through whatever challenges life might bring, to create a home filled with love and laughter, to never take for granted the precious gift of their unexpected meeting. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared to the gathered congregation. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Xavier's kiss was tender yet possessive, a public declaration of their commitment that brought cheers from their friends and neighbors. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier Irwin, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness that confirmed all her choices since that desperate flight from Wood River. The celebration continued at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was music and dancing, abundant food prepared by the women of Valentine, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. Even Silas made an appearance, gruffly presenting the couple with a pair of finely crafted leather saddlebags as a wedding gift. As evening fell, Xavier pulled Eleanor away from the festivities for a moment of privacy near the creek where they had often walked during her first days at the ranch. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they stood beneath a canopy of stars. "Completely," Eleanor assured him, leaning back against his chest. "More than I ever thought possible." Xavier turned her gently to face him, his expression serious despite the joy of the day. "I want you to know something. That day when I saw you running from the church, I didn't stop out of pity or even just to help. Something inside me recognized you, Eleanor, like my soul knew yours even then." Eleanor reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I felt it too. Even terrified as I was, something told me I could trust you, that you were part of whatever came next for me." "And now we know what comes next," Xavier said, bending to kiss her softly. "A lifetime together." The sounds of the celebration filtered through the trees' music, laughter, the voices of friends and family who had embraced them both. Soon they would return to the party, and later retire to the small cabin Daniel and Xavier had built on the ranch property as their wedding gift, the beginning of their life together. But for this moment, under the vast Nebraska sky, Eleanor savored the journey that had brought her here from a barefoot bride fleeing an unwanted marriage to a woman who had found not just safety and independence, but a love beyond anything she had dared to dream. "Get on," Xavier had said that day, extending his hand to a desperate stranger. Eleanor had taken his hand and never looked back.